No.
Okay. Our group had chapter 11, which talks about the instructional program, the control of public schools, and kind of goes into attendance a little bit. A little bit of background, what I thought was interesting. The United States Constitution makes no reference to education until the 10th Amendment, which eventually placed responsibility of each state to provide free public schools. Because of this, each state constitution places the responsibility on its legislature to provide schooling for all children within the state at the public expense. So right here, the legal authority for defining the curriculum of public schools resides with the legislature. Based on constitutional provisions in a few states, this duty is shared between the legislature and the state board of education. Here in Nebraska, we have the Nebraska State Board of Education. So I went ahead and was looking on their website, and that kind of about the Nebraska Department of Education, kind of their mission statement. So a little bit of background on it. It says Nebraska's present public education system is based on the state constitution adopted in 1875. The state constitution directs the legislature to offer free instruction in public schools for people between 5 and 21 years of age. School attendance is mandatory for children 6 to 18 years of age. Public school also provides special education for children with disabilities. So Nebraska gives power to the State Board of Education there. You can go to the next one. Okay, so the legislature may, at its discretion, prescribe the basic course of study, determine testing and graduation requirements. In most cases, state legislatures delegate curriculum matters to state boards of education, and most importantly, with local school districts. So many local school districts establish local councils that are empowered to make curriculum changes, such as textbooks. I know in my school district, we have a curriculum director who's kind of responsible for the curriculum changes. They meet with all of the curriculum heads. The curriculum heads meet with just the gen ed teachers of each subject. In Gretna, we adopt a new curriculum every 7 years. A lot of inputs given from the teachers as far as what materials they want to instruct the new curriculum, and which textbooks and things like that we want to go with for the next curriculum cycle. Does anyone have similar experiences in their district, or do they do it differently?
Ours is the same. We have one main curriculum director, and then she does research for like a year, and then we don't actually pilot, which is kind of unique because a lot of school districts pilot. But instead we develop, like this year we did ELA curriculum. We're getting new curriculum. And so I was on that team, and we met throughout the whole year. We actually had ESU3 come out, and we had a consultant there who led us through the whole thing. So made sure that everything aligned with our standards and our mission statement that we created, the Bennington mission statement and our vision. And it was nice to make sure that we had her making sure we're having like evidence-based practices within our curriculum. But yeah, ours is a 7-year cycle as well.
Yeah, when we were planning our the curriculum change happened like right before my first year of teaching. And so we had to go in and look at everything and tie everything to the standards, and kind of meet outside of school during the summer and on weekends throughout the semester as well. So it's kind of an interesting experience. I'm glad I got to do that. I'm glad that we kind of get a say in it as well. With that being said, though, so like in Nebraska, the Board of Education has a lot of say, and local school districts have a lot of say as well. But the government, or the state, still has policing power, which basically allows them to protect the health and safety, and basically the overall well-being of students. So because of that, parental authority is not absolute. It can even be restricted if it's in the best interest of the child. Okay. which kind of leads us into compulsory attendance. So every state requires children between certain ages, usually 6 or 7 through 6 or 17 years old, to attend public, private, or homeschool. Go to the next one there. So today, parents, if they fail to comply with the compulsory attendance laws, they can face criminal charges. There's something called Parents Patriot, which was enacted in 1852 to 1958, which basically gave the state powers over minors to protect children from like unlawful labor laws. So that's kind of how that started. I know in my district, all students, even if they're excused absences, so if they have a doctor's note or a legitimate reason, I know after 10 absences, parents receive a notice in the mail and via email. And I know like 10 days, really, it's a lot of days, but I'd say a good percentage of our kids will hit 10 missed days throughout the school year. So you'll have parents kind of reaching out, kind of worried, like, is like, are we okay? And it's always a yes. But I know after I looked up our parent handbook, and after 20 absences, Gretna can give notice to take it to a local attorney. There are some exceptions. And one of them I thought was interesting. It was an example from Wisconsin, where there was a family who was Amish, wanted to pull their child out of public education after the 8th grade. And they were able to, because they deemed that they were pulling them out for religious reasons. So they were able to do that. So that seems to kind of be the way around that, is if it's a religious reason. Again, I haven't been teaching too long, but I can think of 2 examples where whether there were mental health issues going on with the child, or we still don't really know, the kids were missing a lot of school and ended up being pulled out for homeschool. So do you guys have any attendance issues or any stories that you guys have had?
I'd say this is our biggest problem right now. Like that, it was not a problem I just finished my 13th year teaching, and this is by far I teach at a small private school, pretty middle class, above, a little bit upper class, but like you get a few lower class kids, but like we never really have too many issues. You got 2-parent households, good homes, good families, and it's kind of small town, but like this is something that once COVID hit and we sent kids home, it wrecked certain kids. Like, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. Like, we lost, I want to say 4 students. So we went home this spring. Our school is probably out the longest, because we were at we're in town at the YMCA when they basically canceled because of COVID, because it was our basketball tournament, I guess, this Special Olympics basketball tournament. So we were out a little bit longer. So our kids were out all of 3rd quarter or 4th quarter or whatever. But we all came back that fall, and you could just tell, like, there was kids who were probably above average intelligence, that they couldn't handle the caseload anymore. It was like they didn't know how to deal with it, and so they just went home. I mean, like, they just started getting sick. They were making themselves sick. They were getting overwhelmed. Fremont High and middle school, I know right now in town, is they send out kind of a monthly or every couple months, they send out a local mailing, like a newspaper. And one of their biggest concerns was, I think at the middle school, their 7-8 building, there was 25% of their population at the 7-8 building, 25%, 1 in 4 kids, were missing and deemed chronic absent students, like, meaning that they were missing over 20 days of school. Like, wow. Like that's insane to me. And there's kids that they'll say, well, I'm just taking a mental health day, not showing up today, and they're gone. And you know, some kids can handle it, some kids can't. And then when they can't, the one day turns into 3. And then pretty soon you're at the alternative school in town because there's no way to overcome that. And I lost, as a football coach, I lost my starting running back 2 years ago because of it. He couldn't handle it. He overwhelmed himself, started having anxiety. He refused to leave the house. So it was weird. It's awful.
We had a similar example of that as well, and the absence got to like 40, 50 before they were pulled for homeschool because of the whole legal process and everything.
Now, does that change with excused and unexcused absences? As far
No,
as that 10 days that you were talking about, Jacob?
So after the 10 days, that there's no consequence. There's no, they don't contact attorneys or anything. The 10 days is the parents just basically get a notice to kind of say, hey, this could happen. We need to make sure we're getting them to school.
And
once
that's
you hit 20 though, you can take them to the county attorney.
20,
And like, it doesn't matter if you're sick, it doesn't matter. Like, if it's kind of your discretion of like, once you hit those numbers, you can send it there and then they're going to investigate it. It's kind of a next step process of like, hey, just so you know, this is a problem. And whether the county attorney wants to press charges on the parents or whatever, as you guys read about, I mean, they can, but I mean, it was like, in my case, the kid showed up 3 days out of the first 45 days of school.
Yeah. And I teach in a pretty affluent area, and it's amazing, especially after COVID and after things kind of went to Google Classroom for us for a while. Once we returned, the amount of vacations that kids were on all the time. I mean, seriously, there'd be kids who've gone 2-3 weeks at a time in a different country on vacation, and parents were like, well, let's have them check in Google Classroom. I'm like, well, that's not really how this yeah.
All right, I'm going to talk about homeschooling now for a little bit. So almost every state in the nation has their own provisions for homeschooling. Homeschooling is legal in all 50 states, but requirements and rules widely vary, obviously. Each state lays out their own standards for homeschooling in regard to compulsory attendance laws that we just kind of touched on. And Nebraska statute 79 201 defines the compulsory attendance. And just a little bit of that is a child is of mandatory attendance age if that child will reach 6 prior to January 1st of the current year and has not reached 18 years of age. A few exemptions would be meets graduation requirements early, withdrawals from school at 16, enrolled in a program that prepares them for grade 1, and does not reach age 6 by January 1st. So parents offering home instruction must fill out an exempt school form found on the state education site and must be filled out by a certain date. And in Nebraska, that date is January 30th, I think I saw. Part of the application process requires a provided curriculum guide to the state. So that curriculum guide can be free or paid. There's just different programs out there, and that will be accepted or denied by the state. The state posts curriculum from the past. Well, at least Nebraska does. I didn't look into any other states, but they post previous curriculums that they have accepted in the past on the NDE website under the homeschool information. So that's nice to have if you were trying to pull out your student or your child for homeschooling. And then schools can give exemption to compulsory attendance laws if the application is pending or accepted on the NDE database. So then schools do not have to count the actual attendance. Does anybody deal with homeschool often in your schools?
Yeah, in Sioux City, we have a decent sized population of kids that do homeschool. Fortunately, it's a lot of times a way to get out of attending school for some of the families here. there's some that are legitimate, and then quite a few that just go through all the motions to do homeschool and not attend class, or not have to live up to the compulsory attendance laws. But that's how it works in a bigger school district.
So moving on to charter schools. Charter schools are public schools that emerge through a contract with a state agency or a local board, which means they can be for monetary gain, unlike public schools. And I don't know a ton about charter schools, but basically sounds like a person or an agency can own the school, and that's why they can have monetary gain. So charter schools are not legal in Nebraska, actually. And Nebraska is one of 4 states in the US that do not allow charter schools. Charter schools do not have to be accredited, which means they do not follow Rule 10 of accreditation. And I talked to my superintendent a little bit about Rule 10, and he said that's kind of the Rule 10 gets brought up a lot as an administrator. And it covers a lot of legality. So that'll be a good one for us to keep learning as we go throughout our careers. Charter schools have their own guidelines and graduation requirements, obviously, then. But as far as colleges, typically only require transcripts and ACTs. So students who attend charter schools can still attend higher education as long as you have a real transcript and potentially an ACT score. Now moving on to health requirements. You guys know anything about charter schools? Any charter schools around? Are you guys all Nebraska, correct?
Yeah.
No, but I feel like it relates a lot to school vouchers, and considering we're in this whole debate over LB 753 right now, and like the petition not to get on the ballot. I mean, and it's different, but the idea of using that city, state, or federal funding to provide that education for students who are maybe in the low income brackets or low achieving school to be able to have choice. So I feel like that's kind of the current debate in Nebraska is whether we want that to be on the ballot or not.
Right. All right. So health requirements. States require medical examination and immunization as a prerequisite for school admission. These health requirements are supported by the courts to maintain the protection and health and safety of students enrolled in public schools. So these health requirements are completed in different stages. And I have an example here in the slides. And I won't go over all of that, but it kind of lays out just the different ages and expectations of immunizations. Do you have that on there?
Can you see it right now? Oh, never mind. It just switched for me and not you guys.
And if it doesn't pop up, that's totally fine.
You'll probably
Like
have to
I
exit you'll have to exit the slideshow.
Don't worry about it.
Here it is. Can you see it now?
Yes, there we go. Yeah, so if anybody watching this wants to, take a screen clip of this, but this will be actually on the NDE website, and it just shows the different ages and immunizations that they need to have at different stages. So that way they're not being bombarded all at one time. And then the schools can keep track of this much easier based on grade level.
Correct me
So,
sorry.
Go ahead.
I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you can get out of certain immunizations by claiming it's against your religious preference as well.
Correct.
I've seen that done in our building before.
Yep. Yep, that's exactly what I was about to say. So yeah, Nebraska does not allow immunization exemptions, they do allow immunization exemptions for religious reasons. And that'll be actually on, so I didn't look into it as far as the state level, but for the handouts that my school hands out as far as immunization records, there's a box that they can check on there that says I am exempt for these immunizations because of religious reasons. Along with state requirements, it's very important to have procedures and policies in place on all health related matters. So a couple examples that I kind of thought of are physical forms, and those are provided by the state, asthma, allergy, anaphylaxis history, and then medication policy, non-prescription and prescription. Those are good ones to have in mind that I never really thought of until I started kind of researching this and thinking more like an admin. But the more policies you have in place, the more you're going to be protected, because little things like on all of this history, having emergency contacts, how's the medication going to be given, who has permission to give that medication, how will the medication be stored. Some medication needs to be stored at different temperatures than others and needs to be locked up when others don't have to be locked up. So policies are great in regards to the health requirements.
And I think this is, yep. So state of Nebraska has college and career readiness standards that must be adopted by all the schools, and they have to be assessed at all the grade levels that are required. You guys might have to help me out. What grade levels are they? Is it 3rd through 8th, or I can't remember?
Or like the testing? Is that
Yeah,
what
like
you're referring to?
state testing.
Yes.
So Nebraska is a state that has adopted Common Core standards. And they were developed as part of a race to the top initiative. And I kind of wrote some notes. Some argue, that federal standards further negate the control of education by the states. And then, as you've seen in the news, a lot of special interest groups, parent groups are fighting back against some of those standards. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Local school districts have to follow those state standards, but they can add other things if they wish. They may have their own curriculum standards, but they have to follow the state standards. Courts generally side with states when it comes to standards being put out there, as long as they don't infringe on any federal requirements. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So then I had a couple questions. So what are most of you teach in Nebraska? I haven't. What are your thoughts on the Common Core standards, and have you ever experienced any controversy since their adoption?
So actually Nebraska uses the Nebraska standards.
Okay.
And so we're kind of one of the few that has not gone to Common Core. From my recent work this summer I work mostly with ELA. The only thing I noticed is, so the curriculum we adopted obviously has everything geared towards the Common Core. So we had to go through and make sure all of our assessments matched this Nebraska standards and that it was met with rigor. And it was kind of interesting because I actually kind of felt, I know the Common Core standards are like one piece is how they're supposed to be very rigorous and the high expectations for students. But I kind of felt like there were areas on the assessments with the Common Core that were not as rigorous, and that the Nebraska standards were asking students to explain or kind of use more of those higher level thinking skills. So it's kind of been an interesting process going through, and it's been kind of tedious. We went through every single standard and we went through every single assessment and made sure that it was matching. And if it wasn't, like what needed to be changed. So that was just kind of one side that I've seen of it, is just kind of that extra work of making sure our standards are meeting our curriculum and that our students are being assessed on our Nebraska standards.
So I'm a physical education and health teacher, so mine's a little different. Nebraska actually does not have state health standards yet. They introduced them, which caused a little bit of controversy there, about 2 years ago, I think, with some of the stuff that they were trying to introduce. And so that got wiped off the slate real quick. So as of now, there's still no Nebraska health state standards.
And I teach in a private school, so we're a Catholic school, so actually we follow we're part of the Archdiocese of Omaha. And so we follow the Archdiocese standards, which were created based on the Nebraska state standards. They're pretty much the same thing, except there's a theology component to it. So there's a Catholic faith, because we teach religion here. So there's a religion set of standards that we include in it. But if you go look at you can go to the Archdiocese of Omaha or the Archdiocese of Omaha Catholic Schools and look up all of the standards there. They would line up with the Nebraska state standards. Differences is we don't do certain types of testing necessarily. So we have testing. So the Archdiocese kind of leaves it up to us with what we want to use as testing. So our school, we just adopted using maps for, 3rd grade through 8th grade or whatever it is. I can't remember. So I teach social studies, so I don't, it kind of deals with me, but it doesn't necessarily deal with me. If I was a math guy, I think it'd be more part of my daily life. But for the most part, it's nothing. If my job here would be no different than if I was at Fremont Public School or somewhere else. I think it's pretty generic.
All right. So, and then intellectual property and fair use, patents, trademarks, designs, copyright material. Copyright Act prohibits unauthorized use of copyrighted material for profit or public display. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Get all those on there. Essentially, and I kind of summarized all these slides together. There's copyright laws that educators have to follow or should be following. Most of them are sort of common sense at this point, but some highlights I wrote down. You can't take a textbook and make copies of the entire book and distribute to your kids. But a single photocopy, that's acceptable, of like 1 page. Software used to be a bigger deal because, the emergence of the internet and lots of different software companies and lots of different things out there. Most of those are now covered in site license agreements schools have with the companies. So they pay for a certain number of students to be able to use their content. And an example would be maybe you buy one license and then let 50 different kids use it. Most schools and companies have gone away from that deal where you have to buy a site license in order to access that content. There's really tricky ones, in a giant summary in the book, as far as like teachers using different photos. And I just kind of jotted down. Teachers are allowed to use a single photo, but not more than 5 from any certain photographer in their classroom materials. And those are things that I don't know that everybody follows to a T, but sure that there's some violations here and there. I mean, I was always told, like, you can't just bring your DVD to school and play a Disney movie as an example. You're supposed to have a license to do that. Internet, schools have to limit access to the internet, and that gets harder and harder every year. But they have to do their best to prevent access to inappropriate materials that are out on the internet. In your careers, have you had any experience with copyright laws in schools? Have you
I'm a
has it ever
violator.
been brought up?
So again, private schools. So we benefit greatly from the state's textbook loan program. So we work with Fremont Public Schools to gather resources, and we had a clerical error one year where we got new books, and there was, so due to staffing issues, I teach 7th and 8th grade social studies. So one year it's on a rotating basis. So one year I teach American history, before Reconstruction. And then the next year I teach world history. And it was this time to teach American history. And for whatever reason, the lady put in, like, we had 40, she put in 40 instead of 60. And so I showed up the week of when we came back for in-service. And they're like, all right, here's your books. I'm like, we're missing like 25 books. And she said, well, that's how much we put down. Well, I'm missing 25 books. Like, I don't know what you want me to do. And so I took pictures. I started scanning everything on my phone, and I just started uploading it to the Google Classroom, because I didn't have 25 books. We could share books, like kids are going to go home. This is post-COVID, by the way. So like, I already had Google Classroom up and running, but it was like, there was no way I was going to gather 25 books via Amazon in time, or we didn't have the resources. That's the other thing. It's not like, like I would have gotten told no. They would have said, well, figure it out. Like, well, I figured it out. So that was my no, but it was a necessary no to make sure that kids had access to the textbook. So in class we would share books, but I put it online so that way, they could reference the Google Classroom if they needed to read at home or something like that. So that was my necessary evil.
I've experienced it a lot through, like what you're saying, with displaying DVDs. We use Apple TV to display our screens, and so that automatically now has a lot of different copyright stuff in it. So like, I couldn't pull up Amazon or Netflix or whatever and display through it onto my screen. It will just be black because of the Apple TV. So I think we use a program or a website. It's called Schwenk, that we have a license with, that allows us to display, because I guess we're paying for it, and we're paying to display it. Allegedly, there's a lot of teachers have the old cord they can just wire their laptop into the wall. And so that's kind of what we're cracking down on now, is you can't do that. You have to use the website that they're providing for us.
It's also not just DVDs or video, but music and activities. The NSAA kind of yelled at us a couple of years ago, not me specifically. They could have, but it was a general statement like, no, you need to, like, when you're hosting games, you're not supposed to play copyrighted music unless you have the playing rights to that. And so, like, when you go to a Nebraska football game, you're hearing, Eminem or whatever else, like, they have the rights to play those songs. You hooking up to Spotify at your football field or your basketball gym, you actually don't have the rights to that. You're actually in violation of the copyright law there. So, fun fact of the day, I guess.
That is a good one to know.
I can't play it literally won't play Spotify through Apple TV.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's already got a stoppage on it?
Yep.
It's like we talk about, and I'll discuss it in my slides, because in my next, I think so. We went ahead a couple slides. We need to go back to 17. But one of the first notes I made is some of this is a little outdated, because like I recorded somebody, like I think I recorded my kid in my car, and we were listening to a song, and I tried to upload it to Facebook. Facebook has a program built into it that will recognize copyrighted music, and it muted my video. Like, I wasn't even like playing a direct line of, I will say, Thunderstruck by AC/DC. Like, I wasn't even playing a direct line of it and trying to put that on my Facebook. It was in the background of my car, vaguely, not of high quality, but it still recognized it and it muted. It gave me a notification. Your video has been muted due to copyright concerns. So,
Wow.
I mean, it's crazy. Like there's all these laws now, but it's almost like there's a bunch of stuff already set up to kind of keep you out of trouble because stuff is, I mean, like it just already prevents it. And so, that takes me to, I'm sorry if you guys wanted to jump in on something. I don't.
I was just gonna say, how do you get rights then? Let's say I wanted to write to a song. Do you have to pay, or is it
I
just a
think
process?
I think there's companies that sell you licensing agreements. Um, each, for the most part, your record company, like your songs are part of record labels. Your record labels are owned by sometimes even larger umbrellas. So like I make a lot, I've made a lot of videos, and this is, I'm just gonna sound like a terrible person. I've made a lot of videos for our school and involved using copyrighted music, and um, it will tell you right there it's muted because it violates Universal Records uh, copyright infringement. And so like it's not just, you know, Thunderstruck that's covered under Universal Records. There's like, you know, there's an entire library that you could have access to. And so there's different levels in which you can play. Like, okay, you're allowed to use this much of a song, or you're allowed to use the whole song, but you got to pay this much. And you can use it at these events. Like, I think there's agreements that you could get into that you'll have to sign that you're basically borrowing the music.
Hmm.
So, and then I think they even give you like a library. Like they'll give you like a jump drive pretty much, or like some sort of ability to play that music.
Okay.
And that's what you would pull from. But then there's, okay, am I playing it in a school setting, in a contest, or am I playing it to advertise my school and try to get business? You know, am I trying to get families to come to my school by playing this song? That gets into the advertisement gig. And that's where you see, you know, artists and record labels are like, no, well, we didn't give you the rights to do that. You see that with politicians. You'll see they pick a song to use for their kind of their theme song that they walk out to rallies to, and you'll see all of a sudden an artist be like, I didn't give you the rights to play that song or whatever, and they get in trouble for it. They get a cease and desist letter, and they have to make sure that they don't use it because they can be liable for damages, because that's their ownership. So, all right. Moving to copying computer software in the realm of more copyright infringement. I'm old enough to where when I first started teaching and I got hired, I love photoshopping. I love video editing and things like that. And we had licenses, but that was back in the day when you used to have a CD-ROM and you'd plug it in there, and then there'd be the tech guy here would be like, okay, you got to type in this code, and we had X amount of licenses. We are now at the stage now that everything is cloud-based. You buy a new computer now, it doesn't even come with a disk drive. So you can log on through an email, and you have access to Photoshop, the entire Adobe library. You have access to Microsoft Suite, Microsoft 360. You don't even have to put in a CD to actually load the program onto your computer anymore. So, and then once you decide to stop paying for it, it disables your email and it no longer works for you. So again, I wrote outdated because it's kind of, you're almost being prevented from copyright infringement because it's so difficult now to do it. I mean, people still do, but it's pretty impressive with how far technology's come. So copyright laws, they affect computer software, especially this day and age. It's probably the most highly sought after technology and information that you can. It's a big business. A lot of people can make a lot of money. So if you're infringing on that, they will come after you. I'm old enough, and we grew up in the era of LimeWire and all the different things you could use to download music when you couldn't access and stream it online. And that was a big deal because everybody started getting sued. It was like we actually started to know people that were getting cease and desist letters from this. And so it was kind of like, this is, you might have been 14 years old, but it was like, wow, this is real. I might get in trouble. So it is important. And on the educational realm, when you talk about different programs like using Photoshop or some sort of AutoCAD program or whatever, uh, we're a small school, so we're kind of small potatoes if we commit copyright infringement. But if a district like, OPS, think about how many licenses they run through and what they get licensed for, and that company makes thousands of, tens of thousands of dollars probably off that district just on licensing agreements. And if somebody's copywriting that, that's just one school district. Take the thousands of school districts, nationwide, and all of a sudden that makes a business go belly up pretty quick. So teachers should not reproduce copies of software for students from any sort of original program. As a backup copy, you should just purchase another license. And obviously this is in violation of the Copyright Act. Most school districts have purchased multiple licenses. We're actually, another thing of technology, something that's relating to us. We piloted 2 programs of, we have Chromebooks. That's our one-to-one, is we have Chromebooks in every classroom, Chrome carts and all that stuff. But we were having trouble keeping kids off video games and doing this other stuff. So there's actually kind of like a babysitter program, I guess, if you will, a monitoring business that you can subscribe to. And you would basically, I'd be able to watch all 20 of my kids' screens if I wanted to. I can see what website they're on. I can see if they're accessing certain things that they shouldn't. And then I actually have the power to X out of all of those windows. I can block certain sites. I can block everything except 4 sites, 5 sites, or whatever it is. And then those kids would literally only have access to that. So I'm a big Google Classroom guy. So this was awesome for me because I just made sure that all of my Google Suite stuff was on the pass list, essentially. And those were the only sites that kids could access. So they couldn't go off and go play Tetris, And so there was kids who it was uncomfortable for them for the first couple of days, and then they just abided by it. And then there was other kids who literally shut their Chromebook and just sat there and pouted, like they didn't even want to try it. They felt defeated, and eventually they got over it because they still had to turn in homework. But again, that's something that we have to subscribe to. We have to pay for, if we did it K through 12, it'd actually be 3rd through 12, but it would be like we would need 400 licenses or something like that. So we'd pay for that, and that's what we'd have access to.
So you can do that right there, like for your classroom only.
Yeah. So think of it like this: I logged in through a website. Again, it's all cloud-based, and it's like having a Zoom session. It's kind of weird, so you can see all of your windows right here. And then it looks very similar to Google Classroom, actually, in a sense that you can look at, if you're looking at an assignment in Google Classroom, you can see kind of everybody's work and windows and things like that. And you can click on those. It will tell you what website they're on. I can pull it up and I can see if somebody's on Tetris. I can see if they're on Google Slides. I can see if they're on ESPN.com. And then there's X buttons, there's lockout buttons. If somebody's not playing by the rules, I can literally hit a lock button and it locks their single screen. If I feel like I want everybody to pay attention, if I have an announcement, I can literally lock everybody's screen, and it shows a big old lock on the screen, and it shuts them out of everything. They can't do anything. And so even if they turn off the Chromebook and log back in, it's still if they're still part of my classroom at that point in time, it still locks them out. And so the program that I piloted, I loved it because you set it up to be live during 7th period, which might be from, it might be from 1:50 to 2:40. And you have a roster of kids in that class, and it only applies to those kids during that time. And you can start it when you want, you can end it when you want. And then there's actually a beginning and end to the school day so that it doesn't go home with them. So if they have their own personal Chromebook at school, they're not going home, and I can't monitor them. that it's only during my class period. So it was really cool. But it, again, all cloud-based. We didn't get one book. We didn't get one CD drive, disk drive, nothing. It was just a couple emails, and all of a sudden we had access, and the kids were completely monitored, and then kind of went about our business. So pretty cool.
Great.
Yeah.
We have, it's been
What
great.
program is that?
Shoot. There was Go Guardian, which was not mine. And then I can't remember the name of mine, but I remember the guy that was trying to like push to have these happen. He was all about Go Guardian, and I did not like that one. I'd have to look it up for you. Cause it was like, I was hoping that I would have enough say to be like, this is the one we need, because there were some parents, you deal with, you know, the rights of students and things like that. There were some parents who were not happy about it, because the Go Guardian one, it kind of took things to a different level, in a sense that I felt like I wasn't dealing with it, but just based on what I was hearing from students and their families, is it was monitoring them almost 24/7 in a way. And that made people feel uncomfortable. But mine, it's during the school day, boom, gone. If they took their Chromebook home and wanted to go search whatever, then it would do it. So I'll have to find it for you. Once we're done, I'll go find it in my email somewhere.
We use Apple Classroom, or it's all Apple. And so that's what we use with it's called Mosul Manager. They kind of pair together.
Really? Okay. All of your devices, are they Apple then too?
Yeah, so all of our kids have iPads.
Gotcha. Okay. We are now moving on to the contractual agreement, being a reasonable number of copies may be produced for educational purposes. And one of the things that I liked after this bit of information is they included, I wish I should have included the table, but the table in there kind of gives you a guideline of here's when it's okay to, you know, you may think you're committing some sort of copyright infringement, but you're not, because you're kind of covered there. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a guideline for a teacher, like, this is what you can do. Don't do this, do this. And then kind of gives you other avenues and solutions to deal with that. So then grading and academic requirements, kind of switching gears here a little bit. Requirements regarding progress from one grade to another typically are not reviewable by the courts unless there is substantial evidence of unreasonableness. And this is probably the second time I think Dave talked about it, like with the courts kind of stay out of any sort of subjective thing. Like if you don't think, if it's under review that a teacher or a school thinks that somebody is not ready to move on, the courts will probably stay out of that unless there's some sort of due process or discrimination suit that something is not equal or equitable. That's when they'll look into it. But if it's a matter of like judging whether a kid is competent to move on to 5th grade, that the Supreme Court will not, or any court will just stay out of that, because that's a gray issue, and that's subjective. So for example, the 4th Circuit Court of Appeals sided with a school district who refused to pass along any 3rd graders that did not pass their reading level test. There were some parents that felt like that was unfair, but the court pretty much ruled that was their discretion. They're the professionals. It's not the court's job to decide who's deciding who is competent at moving forward. And they just trusted the schools there. So courts have ruled that academics can be, again, subjective and evaluative. So they just stay out of that department. And then student testing, which kind of segues from that. It is well established that the state has the authority to promulgate promotion and graduation requirements. Often standardized tests are used to determine student competencies. We are relying heavier on student testing, and mainly because it gives us very nice, clean data that we can analyze things from. And it's, again, we always talk about we have data days and things that we show up to that we're going to just dive into this and, create our SMART goals based on this, and how can we make, our personal goals better, our school goals better. And it's awesome. And some some teachers and people feel like we rely too heavily on testing, which is, I mean, I can see true to an extent, but standardized tests do help us at least give us a benchmark and see where students are at or where they could be, where they've been, how far they've come. You know, whether you use it for another reason as far as teacher retention or school funding, you know, that's another issue. But if the measures are reasonable and non-discriminatory, they will generally be supported by courts. So, you know, you may not like MAPS testing or any sort of, you know, NISA testing that you got to go through, but you know, it's generally, we decided as schools that this is what needs to happen. It's going to tell us what it looks like. And you may think that your little Johnny's the smartest kid in the class, but the data is not supporting it. And just because you don't like it does not mean that we have to change it. So it's up to the schools to be, you know, the experts on that part. To continue on to slide 22, school officials are provided considerable discretion in matters relating to appropriate academic requirements. And kind of as I stated before, courts are going to side with the schools unless there is some sort of discrimination, inequality. You know, if we're creating testing that is maybe causing one race to be more deficient than the other at testing. If it's a cultural thing, you've seen more like with ACT testing has been revamped to try to include more scenarios and include information and stories that maybe are more cross-cultural. So that way it doesn't necessarily leave out unintentionally some groups of people that maybe don't have that background knowledge. So it's that has, I think, helped out kind of balance things out, but that's when courts can get involved if they deem something is not equal. But they're not going to tell you that you can't have the test. You might have to make some changes, but that's about it. Again, courts in Florida ruled that a school's curriculum did not reflect what students were actually being tested over. So that's another one. So it's like, you know, okay, here's what your curriculum looks like, and then here's what you're being tested over. And it's kind of hard to even get good data from that if you actually think about it. So they were forced to change. Other cases involved tests where, again, discrimination was happening, but again, must be fair and equitable. And then they kind of added there at the end in terms of using data. Oregon was the first state to create minimum competency graduation requirements. New York in 1975 was the first to administer statewide competency tests to their freshmen. Arizona was the first to create a minimum competency standards that was required to graduate. And then Florida was the first state to come up with an idea and fund a remedial program for students that did not pass those graduation requirements. So it kind of gave them a different avenue and would help out the students that were unable to pass those requirements so that way that they could. So that's me.
Okay, to switch kind of gears again, talk a little bit about grade reductions. First, we'll start with more like excused absences. So as I know, we kind of talked in earlier slides, some difficulties with the excessive absenteeism, because it becomes very difficult then of when are we able to have a grade reduction because of all of the absences. And generally courts will support the policies in place for excessive absences if they do not conflict with state statute. Like one example that was reported in the textbook in Michigan, a girl missed school due to an injury. It was an excused absence. The Board of Education's policy stated that if a student missed 3 or more days in a testing period, they had to go to these after-school study sessions. And this girl, so she missed 5 days. So it had her going to 5 study sessions. So, but she only attended one of the 5 study session. So her grade was lowered. So then she took it to the courts. In the end, when it went to the highest courts, they sided with the school, and because they had a policy in place and it was reasonable policy, they sided on the side of the school district. So just making sure those policies are in place and that they are reasonable and they do not conflict with the state statute. I did look up like Bennington's policy, and really, so in our policy, it's under just excused absences, and it says pretty much if a student makes up any work, they will receive full credit. And it does not really say anything about grade reductions for them being absent, but if they missed work and they made it up, they receive full credit. It would be a different story if they missed work, did not turn it in, obviously then there could be some losing of points there. But that was kind of our policy. I'm going to move to the next slide, but maybe kind of like, I'm gonna maybe ask like what your policies are in place, because I know sometimes there are a little more lenient policies, or sometimes maybe there's not even a policy in place. So, but I will go to the next one because it's more about unexcused absences. So, so oftentimes though, if there are unexcused absences or truancy, the school rules will penalize that student. One part is that though, like one, you actually have to make sure the school rules are in place, they are communicated, and they're not too severe of school rules. They have to be reasonable. Like, it's not like, oh, you're absent, you get a 0. It needs to be reasonable. In most cases, the courts have been supportive of schools on this type of rule, rather than on general misconduct. So for an example where they kind of cited more on the side of school is there was a student who lost 3 points in her letter grade. It did not alter her grade point average. It did not alter her standing in the class. She took it to the courts, and actually I found this really interesting, the wording they used. The courts dismissed it and they said it, quote unquote, petty, because, and it was a misuse of court time because that lowering of her grade did not really affect her future and where she was going to college. And there were some other instances too, like another student who was like, this student was already accepted into this college, they were going to be graduating, and that was kind of also dismissed. The only time maybe they will not side on the side of the court is if it goes against like a state statute. So like in another court case, this student lost some academic credit, but they violated the state statute of like, they had to have 172 student days and it did not exceed that. So that was a case where they sided with the student. It also prohibits from like, if there's an illness or school suspension, honestly, that one kind of surprised me, but illness or school suspension does not fit in that category of like how many days, 172. So you would not be able to penalize those students. I had a harder time finding policies for unexcused absences with our board district. They do have policies like barriers to attendance, of reasons why students might not be able to be in attendance, and it did have the policy on like what we're going to do as a school district if you are truant and the steps they're going to take, and you know, maybe going to a school attorney, but it didn't really have any policy on grade reductions. What are some of your guys' policies, practices that you have in place? Like when I was in OPS, we had a lot more leniency when it came to that. We didn't reduce grades because of absences. More or less, we reduced if they did not turn something in or if they didn't make up a test. But we could also exempt students, like if they had excessive absenteeism and we knew we weren't going to be able to make it up and we wanted just to kind of keep them along without falling, like keep trying to catch up. In my school district now, we cannot exempt. We have to, even if they've missed all those days, we do have to find a way to make all that up. So what are some maybe policies your districts or schools have in place?
I think the policy in Sioux City is pretty much like yours. They lose the points for the stuff they didn't turn in, and then they're given an opportunity to make it up most of the time.
I teach at a really, really small school. So we have a ton of teacher discretion. So there's not really a district policy on that, I guess, which can be a really good thing, or it could be kind of a controversial thing if something, a problem does arise.
I've seen we brought in kids during the summer to make it up.
Mhm.
We don't leave sort of we don't have a grading policy associated with it. We have kind of, if you aren't present for certain things that could be associated with a grade, like that are necessary, then that can hurt you, and you will need to make that up somehow. Like, so for example, we're required to have 20 hours of service outside of service days, but also service day is also a requirement. So literally one of our days we go out into the community, and our theology teacher lines up various things that we need to do, whether it be paint somebody's house, clean somebody's yard, haul something from one place to another, do whatever. If you skip that day, if you're like, well, I'm going to be sick, because it's, a common thing of like, well, I don't want to go to that, then we actually do require you to make up that time or service some other time. So you're not just, I mean, yes, it's a zero. It's the way to describe it is we're allowed to put it in as a 0 for now, but that's more of an attention grabbing thing. And you need to make that up for full credit. I mean, you can give full credit. Then that grade will change. So that's really the only thing that we have associated with the attendance part.
Yeah, so it sounds like mostly if they're absent, there's not a grade reduction unless it influences like a grade or something that ways, then it might. There was also talked about like grade reductions for misconduct, which courts kind of have gone back and forth, maybe not as supportive of grade reduction based on general misconduct. They gave one example where 2 students were playing at a guitar performance. They had unauthorized pieces that they played. It was against their policy of, professionalism. It was also in their grading practices, like the rubric that was provided, that professionalism was part of it. And so in that case, they got a grade reduction, and the courts ruled in the favor of the school that it was laid out in their policies. They shouldn't have been doing that. But there was another case where it was an alcohol related misconduct, and the court ruled it kind of invalid due to they didn't see a relationship between the alcohol and the reduction in grades. So it kind of can go back and forth in the courts, but typically they'll be more supportive of absences rather than a grade reduction based on general misconduct. The next piece kind of talks about if there is not so much grade reduction, in this case, physical punishment for poor academic performance. I don't think any surprise about this is the courts have consistently ruled against the school officials for using physical punishment when the student's behavior did not involve improper conduct. Oftentimes you'll see like in policies, it's titled, academic penalties, because when we refer to penalties, it should be through their academics, not using physical punishment. So has not received support. And then the last piece is withholding diplomas, and this will actually kind of work really well with our discussion question that we will briefly discuss, and how school officials are delegated the authority to determine when a student has completed the required curriculum entitling him or her to be awarded a diploma. On our high school webpage, there's a whole section on graduation requirements. It specifically states the academic requirements. It provides a curriculum guide. We also have something called like the 3 C's. So communication, career, and community. And it pretty much says like, here's all the things you could do. You could take this class, you could tutor students, you could do service hours. You have to do one of those in order to graduate. You also have to do a civics requirement, because that's part of a state statute, LB 399. So you need to do this. So it's really laid out of like, this is what you have to do. And then from there, you can then withhold diploma if the student has not completed their graduation requirements. there is no relationship between though, like a diploma and participating in graduation. So if you do get your diploma, that doesn't mean you absolutely have to participate in a graduation ceremony. So they're different. And I think it's also important to note that if they have met those academic requirements, then they must be awarded a diploma, which will kind of fit well with our discussion question of if there's a behavior infraction, if they still met the academic requirements, they should be awarded a diploma. So that kind of wraps up. There's, I feel like, a lot of pieces that go into chapter 11 in the instructional program. And I feel like every time we keep going back to, you know, there are statutes in place, there are policies in place, and being educated on those pieces as an administrator is really important, so that you know that you are following all the procedures, and kind of have that safety behind you if you're following those procedures. Okay.